This is CUNY TV, the television station of the greatest urban university in the world.
As the sun sets at the end of a New York workday, the mind transitions from daily tasks to the cloudier, more philosophical regions of social issues, culture, and politics. In a democracy, every perspective on the world is important, and people in art and culture have surprising bodies of knowledge that can shed fresh light on today's reality. The following conversations with artist and gallerist Janice Guy and documentary filmmaker Roger Ross Williams took place at that time of the day.
Janice Guy is a British artist and gallerist. In the 1970s, she attended the famous Dusseldorf Art Academy and went on to become co-founder of Murray Guy Gallery in New York City. Recently, Guy's Dusseldorf self-portraits have been rediscovered and exhibited and celebrated as bold and witty feminist statements. You started as an artist, and you said that having a gallery in some ways was like a way to be an artist.
Actually, Kim Buruat's Higher Pictures, she decided that when she did the show with me now recently that she wanted to adjust the narrative, because the narrative was always, I stopped making art and then I started working in galleries. She said, no, actually I never stopped making art, it's just I changed medium. And that's definitely, in a way, something that I did. I mean, when I was an art student, I was very, very much interested in exhibitions. In fact, I often say that when I was studying at the Art Academy in Dusseldorf, my biggest teacher was Conrad Fischer.
He's a gallerist in Germany now,
yeah. Who actually had also began as an artist, more than my professors in a way. So I was obviously at the time very, very much interested in making exhibitions, and I don't mean necessarily as a curator. And somehow when I started working in galleries, the idea that that's something that I would do was always there. But really, if I think about it, I was always doing the gallery almost as if I was making a work of art. By, my choices of who I was showing, and the most exciting part of it was making the show, was actually installing the show. And I've never really had much of a business sense, so it kind of surprises me that I managed to keep the gallery going for nearly 20 years.
There's no messing around with it in cities like New York City. I mean, you have a lot of bills to pay. It's a really hard thing to do. Even though there are a lot of great artists around, there's a lot of talent.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
The coherence of the program you had at Murray Guy, I always think of that gallery as having a particular kind of narrative program, meaning a lot of the artists sort of worked in narrative or storytelling in one form or another.
That has a lot to do with where I came from and what I was looking at. And actually my first gallery in New York City was in my apartment. It was an old school building that had been converted into apartments, so it already had a space that wasn't a typical domestic space. Right. My very first idea was to do a photography gallery, because photography is my first passion, is my main interest at the time, and most of the artists that I was looking at right from the 70s onwards, most of them wouldn't consider themselves photographers. It was generally the sort of conceptual art used photography a lot, and film. It ended up being a very lens-based program.
With like Moira Davey and Barbara Probst and Zoe Leonard.
And then also Matthew Buckingham and Anne Lislegard. Oh, and then, a more sort of conventional type of photography with Anne Millet.
So let's jump then to Dusseldorf Art Academy, where you went in the 70s, and from there we have a lot of different kinds of photographers. I mean, they're all of a certain kind of photography, this sort of German objectivity, Thomas Struth, Thomas Roth, Andreas Gursky, Candida Hofer. You choose to go to school there. I think the first thing I want to ask you is, your family is Jewish, right?
One half of my
family. One half Jewish, okay.
This is tough, yeah.
Was this a strange decision to go to Germany in the 70s to go to art school? I mean,
it's hard for me to remember the reason why, but my first impulse was that I wanted to leave the country. I'd grown up with an English father and a mother from, let's say, the vague sort of ex-Austro-Hungary, Central Europe. And my mother had made sure that we, my brother and I, we understood that Great Britain wasn't the center of the world. And I was very, very curious about the rest of the world. We traveled a lot. And so when I finished art school in England, I applied for various grants, scholarships to study abroad. And the German one was the first one that came up, and I was interviewed and I got it. So I didn't bother with the rest, and I had to accept it immediately.
Don't overthink it.
But I'm trying to think back about why. Was there a reason why I applied for Germany, or was it just one of the many that I applied for? Most contemporary art was happening in Germany, and mostly in the Cologne, in the Rhineland area, because it was an industrial area, and a lot of industrialists were collectors who would then give on permanent or temporary loan their collections to the cities, and the cities would build museums. Mm-hmm. So the whole area of Cologne, Dusseldorf, Krefeld, Essen, Duisburg, Dortmund, München-Gladbach, they all have museums, and they're all pretty amazing museums. And Dusseldorf Art Academy, which is a very old academy, I mean, it goes back a long, long time, but it had always been seen as one of the most important art academies of that area, and certainly after the partition of Germany. That
sort of recovery and maybe industrialization, the modern world is becoming very interesting in a particular way.
Exactly.
Right?
It was an important academy, and Dusseldorf at the time was really a very, very lively city.
So your work that you were doing at the time as a student, I mean, so different though than these other artists are pursuing, kind of objectivity.
I didn't start off studying with the Beschers, and in fact when I actually ended up studying with the Beschers, it was more out of a friendship that I had with both the Beschers themselves and their students. The Beschers was something totally different, but I just ended up being, I remember when Bernd said to me, "Why don't you come and be one of my students?" And I said, "But I don't do what your students do." And he said, "All the better."
How did that interface work then? And once you were doing portraits of yourself and sort of examining, the objectification of women, or maybe exploring how I'm just interpreting now. So how did it work then to start working with the Beschers being so sort of scientific in their approach?
Again, I think it was much more that they wanted something to come into the situation that was not following what they were doing.
Good for their classroom discussion.
Yeah. They were definitely part of an art world more than part of a photography world. In any case, always were. I mean, it was definitely a period in the 70s of second wave feminism that was very, very important for a lot of the women artists.
You've had a recent kind of rediscovery. It was like 2008 or something. You pulled things out you had made. I think they were stored in Germany with Thomas Struth. How can you account for the sort of resurgence of interest in what you did then? I think in some ways it has caught you by surprise.
The first time around it was Matthew Higgs, who is the big discoverer. And he didn't even know what I did. He just knew that I'd studied in art school, and he asked me what I made at the time and if I had anything to show him. And that was in 2008, so that was 10 years. It was 2007 actually, the first time. And that was a surprise to me to look at the work again at that time. But I almost feel that it's resonated a lot more now. And I think that also has a lot to do with, on the one hand, this sort of people are looking at a lot of women artists who were overlooked at the time, and we're seeing a lot of this work from that time that was very much connected to the women's movement and with feminism. And then all of the the situation of women today, the misogyny that we're seeing in the politics of the country, the whole violence against women that's being now seen for the first time almost. And I think that my photographs, even though they weren't necessarily about violence, they resonate.
Be a part of what some strong women artists, I would say, are doing now, which is in some ways taking the stereotypes of the male gaze, I guess, but then overdosing on it. You want this, give you that much of it. It's very kind of like defiant.
Or turning it back. Back in the day, I think less now, because I think it's much more of a trope that one sees so much with the whole selfie world.
Yeah.
But the idea of, when I photographed myself naked in a mirror, on the photograph that then appeared on the wall, it's a naked woman photographing the viewer. And a lot of men felt very uncomfortable about that back in the day. As I say, now it's become a little bit more, we see much more of that.
Yeah, like in a Susan Sontag sort of way, you're directing the phallus. Like the camera is the the instrument. One of the pieces I find most intriguing is this piece where you do a lot of different expressions, and I think maybe that's a stereotype about women being emotional or something, but you take it to a kind of absurd level, right?
I was alone most of the time when I was working, and I was working at home, and sometimes the camera was on a tripod and it was just there. There were very often real emotions. It was a wonderful therapeutic way of just getting it out. And then it would go into this sort of like dramatic area, and then I would start, laughing at myself and making fun of myself. And those were actually quite early pieces, where I then printed them, looked at them, and thought, oh, I can't show this to anybody. And some of the pieces that you saw in the show, I had never shown to anybody.
How much of it did you show at the time? I mean, was there a different area of work you'd done that was kind of more interesting then than it might be now?
What people are noticing a lot are these things with the earlier works where I'm not actually, the camera's not in the work. I'm performing in front of the camera, and the camera's on a tripod.
Those are very surrealist. I mean, I almost think of like Merritt Oppenheim, Fur-lined Teacup or something sensual and attractive, but also kind of strange and vulgar,
There are these photographs that I took of myself sort of on a sofa, but my legs would be over the back of the sofa, and then the head is lower, and the elbows become like the arms of the armchair. And then I started thinking, maybe I was always a surrealist from the start. We sort of grew up after the Second World War, where fascism had been defeated, and we had this idea that we now progress happens, we go forward. Yes. And things are going to get better, and we're going to overcome all of the different problems we have in our society.
And also women's rights and gay rights and racial differences and all these things, but no, you can regress so quickly and so easily.
And I think that is the most horrifying aspect of it, that, then you, of course, you look at history and you realize it's always been like that, it's always gone on in cycles. But we're just horrified that we're having to live through this right now. And, again, we grew up thinking that, nationhood was something that causes a lot of problems. And the more that we align with each other and work together to common goals, and now we're getting to a point where everything's splitting up, and there's this sort of isolationist, this nationalism, where everybody now has to have like labels who they are and where they belong.
As someone who's lived in Germany, as somebody who's studied sort of 20th century avant-garde and politics, you just want to warn everybody about Nazi Germany. You want to warn them about the tactics, the propaganda, getting
Well, we're seeing
control.
the exact same tactics
It's
and
so
propaganda.
Parallel. But you can't get anyone to listen. It's sort of as if history is not comprehensible to most people.
Yeah, and then if I think about where can one live today, I also don't believe in this thing of, moving to Portugal or to Athens, and taking advantage of the economic downturns of these countries. But in a way, we're very, very lucky that we live in New York City. We live in one of probably the most racially mixed places in the whole world. And very integrated. One may not think that it's like that, but compared to other places it is.
The exhibition of Janis Guy's work, titled A Foot in the Mouth, closed last month at Higher Pictures in New York. She currently has a curated exhibition of work by artist Julie Lin at the MBNB Project Space in Harlem.
Roger Ross Williams is a documentary filmmaker. His films, such as Life Animated, often explore clashes between social norms and the lives of special individuals. In 2010, Williams became the first African-American director to win an Oscar for his documentary short, Music by Prudence, the story of a severely handicapped singer in Zimbabwe. One of the most interesting things I learned about you today as I was reading your Wikipedia entry was that your family is Gullah.
That is true. My family is Gullah from Charleston, South Carolina. My aunt and I grew up going to the South.
Maybe explain a bit what that is.
The Gullah people are people who held on to their African tradition who live in the lowlands of the Carolinas. So what happened is that before cotton, rice was the biggest crop in America, and the rice cultivators in West Africa were excellent cultivators. And so they were bought over as slaves to America, and the lowlands of the Carolinas mimicked the West African sort of environment. But what happened is that malaria set in those islands, and the Africans had were immune to malaria. And so the white slave owners were dying off, and they fled and left the African tribal people intact, and they were able to hold on to their culture of basket weaving and the food. So we have our food is very different, and a rich history of food and a rich history of culture. We actually have a restaurant. It's also called Geechee. It's in Philadelphia, near where I grew up. I grew up in Pennsylvania, called Geechee Girl. So there's always this
a Creole thing, right? Yeah. So how do you choose your subjects for your films? I mean, I think doing a documentary film is personal, like any creative project, and I can see in some ways that, you know, when you choose a subject like Prudence and Music by Prudence and Owen and Life Animated, I see in some ways you're probably identifying with those people.
Every film is personal. As a documentarian, you know, if you don't have a personal connection to your material, then you're not going to have the passion to like sort of get through it. Every single film that I make is about my own experiences and something that I connect to deeply and want to express. I always say that take your most painful experiences in your life and turn them into art. That's what artists do. That's what my films are. It's like I will take a painful experience, and God Loves Uganda, growing up with my father was a pastor and rejected by the church, and those feelings of rejection, and going to the most extreme place in the world where the religious right controls the country and are killing people for who they choose to love. I go there, and that's what I want to make a film about, because I want to go to those very dark places in my life and explore them. So that was me exploring my own past.
When I think of Prudence, I mean, just so beautiful and as a person, and also so heartbreaking. She's limited in terms of what she can do in life.
Prudence is someone who was completely rejected by everyone around her and lived like an animal, didn't think she was human. And I often growing up felt completely this sense of rejection all around me, and often maybe at times didn't feel I was worthy, or, you know, especially when you're like a young gay kid, and it's like
you're a black gay kid amongst a bunch of white kids, which is sort of like any teenage awkwardness amplified times whatever.
Yeah, so I had this sort of, I was a double minority, right? Gay, especially back then, in like the 70s, and like, you know, when it was like not easy to be gay in high school.
Having kind of a difficult background pushes you toward creativity, and I think creativity is innate in people, and they kind of need to follow that. But I think in some ways life gives you a boost, you know, to find your way, to find some way to express your ideas or to feel a sense of success in something.
After I won the Oscar, my hometown invited me back with like a ticker tape parade, and the mayor gave me the key to the city, and the governor of Pennsylvania named it Roger Ross Williams Day, and Senator Casey, who's still the senator for Pennsylvania. And it was like this whole thing, and then I had to go and I addressed my entire high school, and I said to them, it's all the kids who think they're like outcasts and weird, and the freaks and the nerds and the geeks. You are going to be the most successful people in the world, and all of you. And they bought out the royal court of the prom king and the queen, and they had this whole thing. And I was like, and all of you kids who are like the prom king and queen, forget it. Your life's. I actually, it was my whole speech, and the principal freaked out, and he said, no, he doesn't mean that. he means that everyone is going to succeed. Like he's like, you know, you can't say that. But it was interesting because these kids came to me afterwards in tears, and a teacher came to me, and she's like, I feel like an outcast, and she was a teacher, and she was crying, and like, you know, like I was, you know, it had an effect on and that's the truth.
No, let's talk about then the oppression of normalcy. Maybe that's kind of what we all struggle against, whoever we are in one way or another. I don't know if you know this, but I'm from a suburb of Kansas City. I used to walk from my house up to the shopping mall and to the TGNY and buy fish and school supplies there and stuff. But that building now is the same building I think you filmed the IHOP scenes for those kids training to go to Uganda to be missionaries. I grew up within like a quarter mile of that place, and my parents still live.
What's the name of that? It's a suburb.
Grandview.
Grandview. Yes. You went to the Grandview Mall?
That was the mall. There was even sort of like a Chinese restaurant and bar.
Well, it's now all IHOP.
now it's this sort of corporate, bland place that sort of landed like a spaceship on the town my parents live in.
They've taken over that
town. And I know, watching the film God Loves Uganda, I know those kids. I mean, I know that type of kid. Those are my Kansas City relatives, and they're good people, I think. But you just realize though how frighteningly easy it is for people to be kind of turned in a direction that is hateful and manipulative, and you also see them too as kind of pawns in a larger game.
That sort of movement, which is the sort of evangelical far right movement, is the fastest growing religious movement in the world. Yeah. Much faster than Islam. The goal of the leaders of that movement is what drives anyone to want to conquer other people and other people's ideas is money. I did a lot of research around the movement, and I went to a conference at Harvard. Mm-hmm. That was part of the Harvard Extension. So it was, and they had gotten into the Harvard Extension, and they had this conference, and it was all the leaders of this sort of, it's called the sort of Seven Mountains movement, the seven sort of pillars of power, of the military, the media, like taking them over. They talked about cleansing the earth of immorality, what they view as immorality, but really it was, and that they needed to dominate the sort of the world of business and education and it was and what they did was they all got up there, and it was really the prosperity gospel. They all got up there and they sort of bragged about their private jets and what they have and what they owned and their real estate holdings, and it was like it's really about money. I mean, definitely in Uganda and in Africa, some of the richest people in Uganda are pastors, and the rich people on the African continent are pastors, and they're so rich and so powerful now that they're actually exporting to America. Back to Nigeria has incredible pastors in America who have huge congregations here. And the same thing with Robert Kayanja in God Loves Uganda. He is in Texas, and Joel Osteen is his mentor, the Osteen's parents. So the big prosperity gospel is alive in Africa, but it's also still alive.
I've always thought it was a big contradiction, Christianity's values and American capitalism. Like, these two things don't really seem to match up. When I can't understand why American evangelicals still support someone so obviously immoral as this administration, it's because I think they worship the image of that in a certain way, that idea of white, blonde power, wealth, that idea of having control of things in a certain symbolic way, right?
Donald Trump is a white supremacist, and his movement around him is white supremacy, and people don't call it out for white supremacy. It's the Third Reich. It's like we are experiencing this white supremacist movement in the world globally, and no one's calling it out for what is this? Almost like the media is. The media is afraid to utter the words. The term "America is full" is a Nazi term, and there's a great article in the Times like Germany is full was what this exact term, and there's endless documentation that is a Nazi statement and saying, and that's exactly what Hitler used in the way the Nazi movement. Just in the short history of America, I'm making a film now about the Apollo.
Right.
Not the space mission, but the theater in Harlem.
Right.
And what is fascinating to me is if you look at in 1934 when the Apollo opened its doors to black people. It was one of the first theaters to open its doors to black people till now. And I sort of explore Harlem as part of, the Apollo as part of a community in Harlem, and the story of sort of African Americans and what was going on in Harlem. And the same thing has happened over young unarmed black man in the 30s, shot and killed by the New York City police. They get off scot-free, protests, riots, and now in this day and age where like the reality of Trayvon Martin, I mean, that's just the norm.
Let me ask you this. I mean, is documentary filmmaking, do you think, a better and more effective tool?
People are desperate for truth. That's what documentaries are. Mainstream media is not giving us the truth. I used to be a journalist, so I worked in mainstream media, and I left mainstream media because it was corporate propaganda for America, and I wanted to tell real, honest stories that actually spoke truth to power.
It's about empowering people to feel in general maybe that they do have an impact on the world, on people around them.
I mean, we talked earlier about that, you know, your art and your filmmaking is very personal to you. You know, I'm not just this one-dimensional person. I have many interests in many different things, and I think that as an artist, as a filmmaker, that it really is important that my work reflects all of that. I'm lots of different things, and I want to sort of explore the world. You know, I live in Amsterdam and in New York. I travel extensively. I'm interested in the world. I'm a person of the world. I'm a global citizen.
Roger Ross Williams' film, Life Animated, was nominated by the 2017 Academy Awards for Best Documentary Feature. His latest film, The Apollo, covering 85 years of the fabled Harlem Theater, premieres on opening night at the Tribeca Film Festival on April 24th.